Hello, my friends. We left you on a cliffhanger. They had just discovered that Edmund had left the beaver's house and he was going to the castle of the White Witch. And so the beavers and the other children, Peter, Susan, and Lucy, were all trying to figure out, when did he leave? Did he hear that we were going to meet Aslan at the stone table? And so they were like, okay, we've got about 20 minutes. Let's go. Let's see what happens. And now, of course, you'll want to know what happened to Edmund. Yeah, we still do want to know what happened to him. He'd eaten his share of the dinner, but he hadn't really enjoyed it because he was thinking all the time about Turkish delight. Did you guys see our video about Turkish delight? Have you learned how to make it yet? If you haven't, check out Facebook. It's me and Miss Bella, and she's going to teach you how to make Turkish delight. So watch for that, okay? We'll post it again here on Facebook so you guys can see. And there's nothing that spoils the taste of good, ordinary food half so much as the memory of bad magic food. Ooh. And he had heard that conversation and hadn't enjoyed it much either, because he kept on thinking that the others were taking no notice of him and trying to give him the cold shoulder. They weren't, but he imagined it. You know, do you guys ever get like that? Once you get something in your mind and you're grumpy and you're on the wrong side, it's hard to get back, isn't it? You got to really make a good, strong change. He'll get there eventually, I promise. They weren't, but he imagined that they were giving him the cold shoulder. And then he had listened to Mr. Beaver, told them about Aslan, until he had heard the whole arrangement for the meeting at the stone table. Oh no, he did hear it. That means he's going to tell the White Witch. It was then that they began very quietly to edge himself under the curtain and then over to the door. So he kind of snuck out like this, right? For the mention of Aslan gave him a mysterious and horrible feeling, just as it gave the others a mysterious and lovely feeling. Just as Mr. Beaver had been repeating the rhyme about Adam's flesh and Adam's bone, Edmund had been very quietly turning the door handle, and just before Mr. Beaver had begun telling them that the White Witch wasn't really human at all, but half Djinn and half giantess, Edmund had got outside into the snow and cautiously closed the door behind him. So he heard the part about Aslan, but he didn't really hear about the White Witch not being human. He was still fooled, wasn't he? You mustn't think that even now Edmund was quite so bad that he actually wanted his brothers and sisters to be turned to stone. He did want Turkish delight, and he did want to be a prince and later a king, and to pay Peter out for calling him a beast. So he's on the little selfish side, isn't he? He did want to be selfish and get the food that he wanted, that magical, bad magic, Turkish delight. He did want to kind of pay back his brother for calling him out. As for what the witch would do with the others, he didn't want her to be particularly nice to them, certainly not to put them on the same level as himself, but he managed to believe, or pretend he believed, that she wouldn't do anything very bad to them. Because he himself, all these people who say nasty things about her are her enemies. That's what he thought to himself, that they are her enemies, and probably half of it isn't even true. She was jolly nice to me anyway, much nicer than they are. I expect she is the rightful queen, really. Anyway, she'll be better than that awful Aslan. Oh my goodness. At least that was the excuse he made in his own mind for what he was doing. It wasn't a very good excuse either. However, for deep down inside him, he really knew that the White Witch was bad and cruel. Have you guys ever felt like that when you're kind of just walking down that bad path and you start digging a little deeper and a little deeper and you start talking yourself into things and you think they're true and you really know? So Edmund did know deep down that the White Witch was not good, but he was a little enchanted by wanting to be a prince and a king and eat Turkish delight. The first thing he realized when he got outside and found the snow falling all around him was that he had left his coat behind him at the beaver's house. Uh-oh. And of course there was no chance of going back to get it now. The next thing he realized was that the daylight was almost gone. for it had been nearly 3 o'clock when they sat down to dinner, and the winter days are short. He hadn't reckoned on this, but he had to make the best of it, so he turned up his collar and shuffled across the top of the dam. Luckily, it was not so slippery because the snow had fallen to the far side of the river. So remember, as they walked single file, it was really slippery, but now so much snow had fallen. Remember when the kids went outside, it was like ankle deep. We don't get that much snow in Nashville. It was pretty bad when he reached the far side. It was growing even darker every minute, and what with the snowflakes and the swirling all around him, he could hardly see 3 feet ahead. And then there too was no road. He did keep slipping into deep drifts of snow and skidding on frozen puddles and tripping over fallen tree trunks and sliding down steep banks and barking his shins against the rocks. I like how they say that in English too, barking his shins. That's like banging their shins against the rocks, till he was wet and cold and bruised all over. The silence and the loneliness were dreadful. In fact, I really think he might have given up the whole plan and gone back on and owned up and made friends with the others if he hadn't have happened to say to himself, "When I am king of Narnia, the first thing I shall do is make some decent roads." So he was so close to just making the right decision and turning back. But then he thought, wait, when I am king of Narnia, I'll make better roads. I'll make everything better. And of course, that set him off thinking about being the king and all the other things he would do. And this cheered him up a good deal. He had just settled in his mind what sort of palace he would have and how many cars and all the private cinema and where the principal railways would run and the laws he would make and against the beavers and dams. That's not a good law. And was putting finishing touches on some schemes for keeping Peter in his place when the weather changed. First, the snow stopped. Then a wind sprang up and it became freezing cold. Finally, the clouds rolled away and the moon came out. It was a full moon, and it was shining on all that snow. It made everything almost as bright as day. Only the shadows were rather confusing. He would have never found his way if the moon hadn't come out by the time he had gotten to the river. You remember he said that when arriving at the beaver's house that there was a smaller river flowing into the greater river down below. He now reached this and turned to follow it up. But the little valley down which it came was much steeper and rockier, and the only thing he had just left and much overgrown with bushes, so that he could not even manage it in the dark. Even as it was, he got wet through and through and had to stoop under branches and over great loads of snow as it came sliding down his back. Ooh, he must have been freezing. Think of that snow sliding down his back. And every time this happened, he thought more and more about how he hated Peter, just as if all this had been Peter's fault. Was it Peter's fault? No. Do you ever blame your sisters or brothers when you're kind of in a rotten mood? Have you ever blamed your mom or dad when you're in a rotten mood? Yeah, we've all done that at some point where we're feeling yucky, we're feeling rotten, so it must be somebody else's fault, right? All right, let's make a plan not to do that anymore. Sound good? Because we're going to find out what happens to Edmund tomorrow.